Hi, I'm Ryder Hask, and this is the People's TV Podcast.
Everybody who you pitch just wants to talk. You should bring 30 minutes of slides to a 1-hour pitch. Never have more than half of the time be taken up by you talking at them. Because imagine, right? Like they've felt a problem so badly that they have fundraised for it internally, secured the budget, written an RFP, sent it out to a bunch of people. I mean, this is a time-consuming process for them, and they've decided to do that because this problem hurts. And so they want to talk about it, right? You're talking about the thing that like matters a lot to them in this moment. Like they want to talk, like give them a chance to talk.
That's my friend Jonathan Ewing, Director of Paid Media at APCO Worldwide, one of the largest independently owned public affairs firms. In this episode, John and I discuss the practice of pitching strategic communication services and the techniques he's developed over his career working in sales and business development. If you're someone who spends any amount of time pitching your services, there's a lot of great advice in this episode. Thanks for tuning in. It's funny because I'm so used to being on the other side and confirming visually that record dot is there and that everything is dialed in with the focus and the composition. But of course, as many things in business, as you learn more and grow more and have more skill sets, you need to start releasing those responsibilities.
There we go.
And passing them on to other people and becoming more of the coach and the trainer and giving folks like Ian and Adam a chance to step up and prove themselves and figure it out.
Yeah. I feel the same way every time I'm in a pitch.
Yeah.
Just like this feeling of butterflies, not when I'm talking, but when other people are talking.
Like you're proud of them, or you're just anticipating
I'm just antsy. I'm like, oh, I really hope this point lands. I really hope that the body language from the audience picks this up.
Right. And is that because you spent some time prepping with them and you're watching their journey and rooting for them kind of thing?
Sometimes. I mean, it's not even just a junior thing, right? It's some people are made for this, right? Some people have the personality to be able to step into that place and make that sale and connect with somebody else. And some people, regardless of seniority, how many times they've done it, what their expertise is, right? Struggle, right? And they need more rehearsal and they need more prep and they need more time to think through the things. And it's just you've got this or you don't, right? It's like in photo, right? You have an eye for composition or you don't. You can train these things. You can train a lot of these things, but there's this peak that you hit, right? If you're trying to double down on a weakness, right? If you spend all your time on your weaknesses, you have stronger weaknesses, right? The whole the world is about our lives, our careers especially, are about figuring out what our strengths are and just running at that and only that, right?
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, and then I think also, there's this other element of what are the complementary skill sets that stack on each other logically? So it's not necessarily that you're trying to improve all your weaknesses. It's more about well, if I can do this well, then maybe this would actually make sense to know as well. Yeah. And then those things can start building towards a better holistic kind of career path.
Yeah. All of my time in advertising was spent being obsessed with what comes before and what comes after. So if you're running ads, right, you want to care about what they're clicking on and where they go when they click. And if you look at any profession as that, right, as what comes before and what comes after, and you start to get obsessed with all the other things around it, right, then you just sort of grow from that place, sort of like ordinally, right, one step before, now two steps before, one step after, now two, and you that's the whole thing, right? And that's how you sell. That's how you convince other people that you are an expert. That's how you maintain that position of expertise after the sale, right? Is just being able to know all of the things, right? Not just what this thing is, but how it gets sold to the board, right? What the component parts are going to be. Who else has to weigh in on this, right? It's figuring out the entire picture of it is so much more powerful than just having a component part. But you need to have the component parts. Right? It's I really mistrust people who sell things that they don't do. I really mistrust people who manage work that they've never done.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, just being the practitioner, and that to me has been just the constant learning, like the need to constantly learn and practice in order to tell anybody how to, tell a story visually or otherwise. Because without actually doing, how can you really be the expert? How can you be trusted as the authority?
Yeah. So let's assume you're in, any job for a long time, and you've gotten mastery over that, and you've gotten mastery of the things that come before and come after. You've put in your 10,000 hours. What do you do with that?
Yeah.
Right? It's this crossroads that everybody gets to, and everybody, aware or not that this is a choice that they have to make a choice. They choose to, one, stay a senior individual contributor, right? You've got your talent, you've got your art, you've got your thing that you do, and you just keep doing it incrementally better. Of course, it may take 100 hours to get to 90% proficiency, and then every 1% after that takes another 100 hours, and then you get to 95%, and then it takes 1,000 hours to get to 96%. It's not linear, right? It very much goes up at the end.
Yeah.
And so you can choose that path, or you can choose the management path. Right? I know this. I can teach this. I can have other people participate in it. I can, build, progressively larger teams of people who administer the work, but it's still rooted in the work. And this is where I find myself right now, is you spend so much time doing the thing that you spend a lot of time explaining the thing, and that lends itself very well to be able to explain it to people who haven't bought from you yet.
Right.
And the more technical the profession, the more the ability to articulate the value and the component parts that go into that value are big, right? When you have an iPhone in your pocket and can shoot all the things, right? The value proposition of what it means to be a photographer or videographer changes. The language that you use, right, becomes a lot less about the technology or the ability or whatever, right, and it starts becoming a lot more about your craft, right, like your brand narrative of who you are and what you did and how you came to this, right, and there's very few professions that are as democratized as photography and videography, right? Everyone can do it, and so how do you articulate value such that you can have margin in the sale? How do you articulate value such that you're not competing on price? How do you articulate value such that you can build a niche around something? And those are questions that are best tackled if you have had the experience doing the thing, right? You cannot hire business development people in your craft who haven't done it, right? Who don't know this work and can speak passionately, more than just articulately, right? Passionately about the work from a firsthand experience.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I know through having done and tried to hire people like this and not been successful in it. So you're absolutely right that you need to be passionate about what you're trying to sell or pitch. But going back to your point about, the very nonlinear curve of becoming that like master at whatever the specific skill set is, it also just occurs to me as you were saying it, that as you get further along in that journey, it becomes more and more like subjective whether or not you got any better, right? Like, for instance, if a Scorsese movie comes out in 2023, people are still going to compare it to his prior work, which they may think, well, Casino is always going to be his best. Meanwhile, he's like just trying everything he can to make his movies like incrementally better. And whether or not people experiencing that work see that as an improvement is completely in their eyes, it's subjective.
Yeah.
So, I think that transfers to pitching and to business too. Is like you kind of reach, as you said, like a reasonable level. But I think it's actually really hard to figure out where that is, when to like pivot to the next thing.
Yeah. I mean, movies, art, right? Films are, it's like you make the thing and then people buy it afterwards. it's not making much sense. But the idea is like, you spend all this time like creating the thing, and then it's sort of like out there in the world, and that's a different thing than I think most of the work that we do, which is sort of like ongoing. We don't spend 3-4. You might, I certainly don't, right? So spend 3-4 years making a thing and then producing it and publishing it out in the world, right? There's a lot more value to just like. In most professions, I think, to just shipping repeatedly, right? Making the thing, putting it out there, making more things, putting it out there, and just rinse and repeating. And you get better in your craft, sort of as you do these things incrementally. I make 50 decks a year. I'm spent a lot of my time in PowerPoint.
Wow.
Yeah.
A deck a week, huh?
A deck a week. Yeah, that's real. That's real.
Wow.
Sometimes more, sometimes fewer, but it nets out to about 50 a year, which is a lot, right?
Yeah, it's a ton.
It's a ton. And it doesn't get any less time consuming to I mean, if I have to turn things on a dime, I'll do it. But largely what I look at the compendium of this work as, God, it's so weird to think about like being in PowerPoint as like a career anyway, is like every time I have an opportunity to make a new deck, what I'm doing is I'm taking elements of the old ones so that I can spend a lot of time making something new in this thing that will be templated for the future. And so everything's custom, right? It's all for this. But like once you start getting into a routine and a habit and a rhythm, then you start creating things that are copy pastable. But there's always something new for every opportunity. Always some new way to express the idea. Always some new way to remove words and visualize this. And so it just it doesn't get easier, right? It doesn't get less time consuming. You just get better at it.
Yeah. I completely agree with you, and I've seen that over and over again. And I was actually thinking about framing one of our first decks or like pieces of marketing, which is essentially just like a one-pager that we brought to a conference, and it was like, it basically looked like an email on like nice cardstock, and it was like a description of our company with like a signature at the bottom, and that was our deck material back in, I guess, 2011. So going from there, fast forwarding to today, I mean, it's just completely different. But I have seen, particularly once we got more streamlined with, okay, we're all going to be on sort of a cloud base for this, being able to plug and play elements of decks was like definitely a huge benefit.
Yeah.
So.
We all cringe at our first work, and it's weird to think of selling as that too, right? Like you have amazing work, and your work has gotten so much better, but then how you sell the work also develops like how you do the work, and you get mastery over that, and you spend time with that, and you invest in more materials for that, and you have consultants for that, and you start maturing the art of the sale in your own business. And for smaller companies, this is true. For larger companies, this is true as well. I mean, we don't have it any more together than you do. We just have like more people with more specialty. But the art of the sale is it's art, right? It's art, and the thing is that everybody does it differently, right? I mean, we're here in your studio, and you do so much creative production, and of course you have your own takes on it, right? Of course you can look back at your own work and identify I mean, there's a style that you have that you imbue to everything, and you can see a picture and be like, I don't remember taking that, but I definitely took that, right? The same is also true in sales. There's 20 different methodologies for how to do it, but you pick one, and it's mutually exclusive from all the other ones, right? And so it's open to criticism, just like any art, right? Like, why did you choose that? Well, this is the way that I do it, versus all these other ways, right? And because it's subjective, there's always a lot of criticism. But the thing that you have to do is, exactly what you do in art, which is you pick it and you're consistent with it, and that consistency creates mastery. That repetition helps you get a lot better at being convincing, and you just I refer to myself internally with my colleagues as a dictator with a smile. I'm here to like make the thing happen, and I'm going to structure your input, and you're going to like it, and this is how we're going to do it, and no soup for you. But at the end of the day, there's of course you've got to be personable too.
Absolutely. And I do want to put a pin in that and pick your brain about some more like tactical sales stuff. But just so that we can back up a little bit, can you tell us how you came to be a salesperson in this business? Or I guess salesperson feels a little like dated at this point. So yeah, tell us how your career unfolded, like where you started, what was your origin story, and how did you find this passion for biz dev?
Yeah. Well, Ryder, you and I met in college when I was working for The Hatchet, which was our school paper, and we were both shooting photos. You quickly pivoted to video. I remember asking you this question of why, right? And you were like, well, this is where the opportunity is. There are fewer people doing this right now. Clearly, that was very successful for you. You met me in this moment in my life where I was sort of personally and very quickly professionally sort of wailing on individual skill sets and coming back out of them and feeling like I had a sufficient specialist level knowledge of these things, right? I was never as good as you at photography, but I was good enough, right? I remember getting published at least once a week in The Hatchet. I've done gigs, we've done gigs together, right? But it's not my love, right? Like I got into this and then I got out of it, right? And I've done that for so many other things. I've done that for graphic design. I've done that for social media. I've done that for web development. I've done that for all of the things that sort of remotely fall into the digital bucket. And when I was doing digital growing up, I mean, this was like, customizing my MySpace page, and I was like coding chat bots for AIM or whatever. And I've just like had this, I don't know, like ADHD approach to skills that I just want to like get into it and learn it and discover it and then like have that, right? And it's so cool to like have that in your pocket. Like I learned how to pick locks the other day with like a transparent lock. It's amazing. It's just going to come in handy, Like my dream is to go and pay a defense contractor a lot of money to like stay on a compound for a month and have them teach me like evasive driving and all the skill sets that it's just like I love acquiring these things. Anyway, okay. So in the process of acquiring all these things, I ended up in this sort of digital career and then later pivoted to paid, and that's sort of where I am now. And I've been at 5 agencies and, have seen how everybody does it and have seen all the consistencies and all the, ways that people are not great at selling. And the nature of being, of acquiring all these specialty skill sets is that many people don't understand them. And I remember moving from in-house to agency and resenting so much that my day changed from being about doing the work to spending so much more of my time telling people what I was going to do and then telling them what I did. And it was kind of annoying to me at the time. I was like, if clients would just trust us to get the job done, right, we could do it so much more efficiently, right? If we stopped having to pitch, if we stopped having to build all these fancy reports, and we could just do the work, right? It would be so much more efficient. We'd be so much more successful. We'd enjoy it. You'd enjoy it. It would be better. And it took me a couple years to really just like get like hit over the head hard with the realization of how like dumb that approach was, because telling them what you're going to do is called selling or strategy or planning, all of which are high margin, high value activities. Telling them what you did is called reporting, and reporting's value is getting something to your client who they can then forward to their boss and their teams. And that's where retention happens in work. And so I don't know, I just like saw this vision and I was like, this is incredible. Like the things that I resented, I no longer resent, and I want to spend all of my time doing. I want to spend all of my time like telling them what we're going to do and telling them what we did, because that's where the value add is, particularly when you have things like media buying, which I've spent so much time in, right? Like it just like there's no proof that it happened, right? Like a client signs a big ass check, and then like, if you do your job right, they don't get targeted because they're not the target audience, right? At least when you're like doing like video or photo, right? Like you have a thing for it, right? If you like do media relations, you have like a press release or like a hit for it, right? Like in media, there's nothing. And so like, what is there but a report? And so it was like 4 years in my career that I was like, we are doing this in InDesign. Like, I don't care. We're making this attractive because they paid $100,000 for what, right? For like this paper. And so anyway, so I learned so much about how to do all the ancillary functions of the work because I had to, because that was just part of the job now. And then I fell in love with them. I fell in love with all the parts where you interact with the client, where you prove value, where you and because these are black box things, right? Like web development and social media, and all the sort of things that interact that used to be in the category of digital that now are just like what we
media,
marketing,
content.
Right? Like everything that companies need to do.
Yeah.
I got really good at explaining it. And every time I explained it a little bit differently. And I was looking for, the facial expressions and changes and how people reacted to the thing. And when people were like, whoa, that's cool. And, just like finding all these little, reactions from people that helped me hone the art, and then professionalize it. And so, I found myself not angling for this, role of like sales or business development or whatever, but I was just better at it for having spent so many years explaining what I do and caring a lot about what comes before and what comes after.
Yeah, I like that thought of like, the visualization of what you've done as being, you promised them eyeballs, and at some point in time, at the right place in the right time, these people saw your thing.
Yeah.
And how can you convey that information to someone who never saw the thing?
Yeah.
But paid for it, indeed.
That's real. Well, and that's where you start thinking like, we spent a bunch of money and bought a bunch of ads, and now they have this fancy report. Like, that's cool, but like the fancy report has a bunch of gibberish.
Yeah.
Right? It's like 3-letter acronyms, right? The CTR was this, the CPC was this, and like that was like phase one, I think, of my evolution in reporting, which was trying to like, make the thing attractive and look impactful and look serious. But then, I started to like realize that it didn't it didn't do what I wanted it to do, right? Like I would send it, and like sometimes they would send it to their boss, sometimes they wouldn't, and it like stopped being about how attractive it was, particularly at the higher spend levels. And then it was like, oh well, how can we prove the value of what we did beyond just these gibberish metrics, right?
Yeah.
And it was like, oh well, we don't have the tracking set up to be able to do that, right? So okay, well now that we set up the tracking, like this really calls into question like why we're doing this, and so then that starts putting you back like way earlier in the process of like hold on, like what did we sell into them, and why are we doing this, right? And you start asking these questions, these really simple questions. They're so powerful, right? If you're in a room with people who are just like in the trees, right? And you're like, why are we in this forest? It sounds comical, and this is almost like, I've recently come to understand this is sort of like being able to do this from a place of privilege, right? Just being like, like a white, male of a certain seniority, of a certain age in a room, to be able to be like, why are we here? Right. But it changes the game, right? To ask these simple questions, because so many times we just like, we're just like, yeah, go, right? Like you hired me for this thing. Okay, great. I'm going to do this thing. Right. Like, and I'm just going to trust that you knew why it was that you were spending the money. And that's a real place to take an expert position, right? Is when somebody comes to you money in hand, task in hand, to like slow their roll and be like, but why? Right, like what are we going to
accomplish? What are the outcomes?
And why do we get? And why do you have this money? And why now? And you start figuring out how to do that, which puts you in a I keep saying margin, right? Like margins where other people can't do the thing that you do, right? Commodity businesses come from, you offering photography services just like the guy upstairs and the guy across the street offer photography services. The question is where you capture margin. The question is where you're able to command a premium for your stuff. Yeah. And it can't just be because you have better equipment. It can't just be because you have, like all of these things that other people can match, right? The place where you get margin is where you position yourself as the expert in the sale. And the way that you position yourself as the expert is by asking these fundamental questions and being able to guide them in a direction that you have seen as a consultant others go to find success. And so if you're, doing a fundraising video, for instance, I think we talked about something like this, right? Like the reason that we're doing the fundraising video is so that people will give funds, so that the organization will be able to raise funds, right?
Yeah.
How do we understand the connection between this, right? Like, are we set up to make this video, produce that outcome, right? Are we set to be able to track it, right? If we do track it and it's very successful, have we priced it that way, right? There's this opportunity for value-based pricing there too,
right.
where it's like, I have this, track record of making all these amazing fundraising videos, right? That like produce real value, and this is the value that I've produced for these others, right? And I'm so confident in it that I'm going to charge you nothing for the video. I'm just going to charge you, a percentage of every dollar that's brought. Or, I'm not saying that like every situation is right for this, right? But if you start really concentrating on the objective of like, this is a fundraising video, therefore we're here to raise money for the organization, right? Like, and you put yourself in that perspective, it changes the whole game. It changes the entire activity of what you're doing, because you've oriented yourself to the why.
Yeah, and I love thinking about guarantees like that. And, honestly, we've struggled for being able to come up with those types of guarantees for a number of reasons. One is that usually for a fundraiser, for instance, this is going at an event where they've already put a ton of other resources into like getting everybody in the room and having a great program that's not just your fundraising video. And so how much ownership can we take over the result when we're just this one piece of their fundraising puzzle?
Yeah.
Which, I think the coolest way I've seen it done is when you show the video, then you turn on fundraising. Like, let's say you're doing fundraising in the room.
Yeah.
And then so at least you have some sense that, yes, they created the environment for the tech and for the audience and all of that being dialed in. But maybe there was some marginal effect of them seeing the content and then that informing how much they're willing to give in that moment. So.
Yeah. It's risky. Right? It's risky for you, particularly when you have less control, as you said, of all the other things, of all the other pieces.
Yeah.
I don't know how to crack that nut, right? But for a specialist agency, I work for a generalist agency. We've got 1,000 people around the world, something like 350 people in the U.S. We do everything, right? Mostly, advocacy, communications, consulting, marketing, public affairs, that sort of thing. And the only future for agencies like mine is to be able to control all of those things, such that we can price that accordingly, such that we can guarantee things accordingly, such that we can, when something goes wrong, right, there's no pointing fingers at others because we did the whole thing. It's just us, right? And we're never going to be able to do content creation as well as you can, right? We've got, I love our creatives, I really do, and we've got a bunch of them, and they're fantastic. You're just set up to be better. I mean, you spend all day, every day thinking about this, right? This is the entire thing. If you can't sell this, you go under, right? And so, there's opportunity for the specialist agencies to be like, look, you're looking for this thing, like you can pay their rates, but that's ridiculous because you can pay ours, right? And so, specialist agencies end up either competing on price or on niche. And so if you have a niche, right, if you have a track record in a certain area, if you position yourself around like one thing, right, it really makes you much more compelling, right? Your name is People's TV, right? Presumably there's some category ownership over things that are like TV, right? Like there's people who want when they're producing shows or feature length things for someone to not just be the wedding videographer who also like produces this on the side, right? Like you found your niche and that's where you're able to drill in. I don't know that I have a whole lot of perspective on specialist agencies, but I know that you're eating our lunch because we are trying to compete on individual services, and we lose 9 out of 10 times when we do that. When we have an RFP that comes in the door that's like, we just had this one for this very large nonprofit that was just like all creative, and we got on this Q&A call with all creative shops, right? All creative people asking creative questions, right? And like I'm there asking like, hey, I see in your 990 that you spent $1.4 million on this one agency, and they're on this call. Like, are you happy with them, right? Like, are you?
Ooh, put them on the spot.
Absolutely, right? And so it's like those are the things, and we declined to bid on the opportunity because from a business perspective, we realize that we can't compete for pure play creative services. It's just like not going. We're too expensive. Our capes, our case studies are not as solid as the other agencies, right? Like the organization is like piecemealed this work and made it just about creative and packaged the creative and said, hey, creatives, tell us what we should do, and we're not going to win that. So from my end, for our agency, where we excel is when we're able to take all the things in a pot, right? AOR, right? Agency of record type opportunities, where we're able to do this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing, and like assume all the coordination responsibilities between all the various elements, and to make sure that they like hum well, right? When you've got IATs, right, interagency task forces of lots of other agencies, right? Like every agent, and this is not the one that I'm at exclusively, right, is all of them that I've ever been at, all of them that I've ever seen externally. We spend 10% of our time trying to knife the other agencies involved, right? Just like trying to like set them up to, just like how it works, right? And so it's like our goal is to figure out how we can take the whole pie, right, and make guarantees accordingly.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see that on the buyer side, they're basically like trying to create some friction there by saying, well, why don't we just get direct to the specialist rather than the generalist? So how do you, I mean, that call is a great example, but how are you like navigating that space now with like figuring out who needs an agency of record where you can own all the things and make good on your promises and provide all the value and the outcomes that you're trying to deliver for the client?
Yeah. You asked the right questions. I mean, I've got a client right now. I just was introduced to him 3 weeks ago, and he stepped into this role, and he's got a creative agency. He has a media buyer, and he has a researcher, and we do the research part. And he went on tour with his agencies, and he got briefed by all of them and asked them questions, and just like wasn't getting like the satisfactory response that he wanted about strategy, about like why we were doing this, right? His budget is $6 million right now. We're making a bid for $25 million, and he's like, he felt totally unprepared walking into this job to be able to make an additional resource case, and so I got in touch with him, and just immediately became right hand to him, because I could explain what he was doing. I could explain the interplay between all the different agencies. I could explain best practices and what he's trying to do, and just like get him up to speed in a way that made him fluent with his leadership. And that is how we're trying to angle to get all the pieces in that. We want the creative, we want the media, we want the research, and we also want strategy, which is missing, right? Which when you're trying to like grab strategy from each of the component parts, right? Like the media buyer is not going to have a great POV on like the objectives for the campaign, right? Like the research team isn't going to have like a solid like a thought on like how we should approach swapping out creative, right? Like these are things that like need a centralized person. And so we hope to get the whole thing. We would love that. It's unlikely, but the place where we're trying to angle for is the place of strategy, is the place of margin, is the place of being able to see all the things, right? And like help this guy understand the job at hand, because we've seen this so many times before.
Yeah. And what you're framing it as is it's in his best interest.
Yeah.
Because all of these disparate agencies working against each other, they're lacking a coherent strategy. But talk more about what strategy means when you're coming from this perspective of, we're going to run your strategy. Like, unpack that for me.
Yeah. You said earlier, sales is this word, is this term that just like feels dated and old, right? And I'll circle back to your question here. It's like the reason it does is because people feel like grimy inside about the idea of sales, right? Like it conjures like the business card ninja and the ill-fitting suit at the networking event, just like handing them out, being like, hey, I do this, right? And the reason that like makes our skin crawl is because when people don't want to be sold, it's such a turnoff to have somebody try and sell them. But when people want to be sold, when they come to you with like money in hand and like, Ryder, I would like to produce this thing. Can you produce this thing for me? What they don't want back is like a capabilities deck from you, right? What they don't want back is like, here's the history of our agency, right? Like they're not in networking mode. They're in buying mode, and so you need to be in sales mode to match their buying. I don't know what the thing is, you gotta like match that, right? But then what happens when people aren't in buying mode? How do you as a seller, how do you as the head of an agency, right, network and relate to people? The thing that is the most effective isn't talking about your solution, it's talking about their problem. In every environment and every conversation that I'm at with somebody who's possibly could buy, right? Like my job is to figure out how can I get them to talk about the challenges they're facing. And when I get them to talk about the challenges they're facing, then my job is to frame it back to them in a way that like helps them understand their problem and, critically, feel the pain of their problem more than they've felt it. Because if they felt that this was a problem big enough, worth solving, they would have solved it already. But everyone has a bunch of problems in their life that they may not realize as problems, problem unaware. Many people have a lot of things that they are aware of, problem aware, but they aren't doing anything about it because they either don't know what the solution is, don't feel that the problem is worth tackling, right? Or like haven't found the right person to be able to tackle that problem. And so the job is to take the problem and to just like make them hurt so much by how you're describing. It's so compelling, right? You this is awful. I'm really trying to like get rid of these metaphors, and I need a better one. But like you're trying to like stick the knife in and twist it.
Yeah.
You want them to feel the pain of the problem, right?
No,
and
it's
twist it around.
Visceral.
Yeah.
Visceral.
Yeah. And then you pull it out, and then you're like, but don't worry, I have the patch.
Right.
There's this I Love Lucy episode from way back. I don't know why this sticks with me, but it's this Lucy comes to the door and she opens the door and immediately this guy throws dirt on her carpet and she's like, ah, right. And of course he's a vacuum salesman, right? He comes in, plugs in the vacuum, vacuums up all the dirt, and it's like, oh, this is amazing, right? And it's like, if he just come to the door and said like, hi, I sell vacuums, she would have been like, go away. But instead, it like he made the problem real and he was able to like identify the solve for it.
I mean, that's brilliant, and I wish I could do the same thing for the people that we work with. But often it's so custom what we do. Sometimes it feels like it takes a lot of effort to figure out the exact thing that would be for them. But I also wanted to ask you about price sensitivity, because I think a lot of people who are selling anything really struggle with how they justify that cost. Yeah. And I know that this must be something you're dealing with, especially when you're selling such like high ticket services. So how do you justify your prices as an agency? And what advice do you have for people who are like trying to figure out how do they justify their value proposition cost?
Yeah. You've got to start out by recognizing that not all things have margin, right? The like not all things are worth a higher price tag, and this is buyer dependent, right? Some buyers have an exceptional amount of money to spend on a thing, and they're just going to spend it anyway. And in that situation, like most situations, the job is to put your price down on paper and to like pause, right? If you're pitching it, and you should be, right, like the dollar figure should come live, right? It should come in a call. It should come on a, you know, in a Zoom or whatever. Man, people just have this desire to run on about the thing, right? Like, here's the price, and here's all the value you're getting for it, and here's all the value and value, and it's just like, shut up, just like say the thing. And just like give them time to react, right? It's just like how you deliver it. Okay, so back to the idea that like not all things have margin, right? You've got to figure out like if you are indeed selling a service that is not commoditized, right? Like are you a commodity service provider or are you not? Is this service that you are providing a commodity service or not, right? You have a lot of people who are not commodity sellers, right? You have a custom thing, you do, you know, things that not everybody does, but then somebody asks you for like, you know, engagement shots or whatever. It's just like not a high margin thing, you know, like you price it accordingly. If you're looking to figure out how to demonstrate the value of the work to the buyer, you've probably that question shouldn't happen during the price conversation where you're like, here's the dollar amount and here's the services and here's the value that it provides. The value should have been established way up front, long ago, right?
In your marketing materials or in your discovery calls?
Discovery. Yeah. In framing the problem for them. The most satisfied that people feel on the other end of the phone with me is when I have articulated their problem in such a compelling way that they like wince or they lean back in their chair or they're like, wow, I need somebody else on this call. Or like if you accomplish that, right? If you have the moment where they're like, wow, I really feel the pain of this. Right, I feel the pain of like having used this other provider before and them failing me on quality or product or timeline or whatever. Like, you know, wow, I've you know never bought this thing, and so, you know, we've been running a bunch of static banners and they haven't worked, and like video is really the place that we should whatever. You know, it's like the place to establish the value isn't alongside the price. It's earlier. It's in discovery. It's when you're understanding them and their needs and describing their needs in such a compelling way. They're like, you get it. I love you. Take my money.
I love that. And, you know, I think you mentioned just even calling us an agency earlier are at a bit of a pivot point with that because we've always described ourselves as a production company. And so that made sense to us because when you come to People's Television to get your video produced, we're production.
Yeah.
You know, put the video on the assembly line. We'll come up with great creative, and then here's your video. But I think the challenge I'm running into, as I described earlier, is that that's really where the journey ends for us. And what they do with the creative is completely out of our control. So how can we take any credit for it when we've just shipped all this creative and someone else is responsible for the outcomes or the strategy of it? So we're trying to reframe it as, you know, a video agency so that there's at least an initial conversation about us being concerned with what happens to this money they're about to spend.
Right.
And ideally, they would want to engage with us for some amount of figuring out not only how to like optimize the content, but then stick with us so that we can get creative with all the different tools that are available outside of just, you know, telling the story as it was pitched.
Yeah.
But, you know, right now, particularly since we are often subcontractors, we pitch to agencies and like you said, you know, not to do, we show a capabilities deck of all this pretty work and our wonderful team and directors and everyone who can do the work. And at the end, I actually don't have anything to sell them because everything that I'm selling would depend on their project workflow, their clients. And so we just do this wonderful show and tell. And at the end of it, they say, okay, well, we'll let you know if we don't have anything now, but we'll be in touch. And it's like, dang, like I'm not even being a salesperson right now because I'm just doing like a little dog and pony show.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're just trying to shift that now to like, okay, it's time for us to figure out how to sell the outcomes, be responsible for the outcomes a little bit more, and sell directly to brands or, whoever, organizations, because otherwise we're completely beholden to just being a part of a larger package.
Yep.
That, to me is like, after having done this for 13 years, starting to feel a little like handicapping, So
yeah,
the next step for us is like trying to embrace this new language of like, okay, I guess maybe we are an agency. Figure out what that means.
I have become obsessed with the concept of disintermediation. Right? There's an intermediary between you and someone else, and you want to remove the intermediary to become disintermediated from. It's a wonky term, but
no, I love it.
But
yeah,
it's so strong, right? It's this idea that like your margin gets eroded when you sell to agencies because they are not the end client. There's someone else, right? And so, I mean, I sympathize, right? Like walking into an agency environment and showing a bunch of pretty things, and like, how can you possibly sell anything of value to them when the focus is all on like you and your pretty things next to the other agency who just walked in there an hour ago with other pretty things, and this is just like a standby thing to get on the roster because you got the meeting and like whatever, and it's like that's just not the environment where you're going to be able to capture margin. That's just not the environment where you're going to be able to like sell additional value, right? Because they do that, because that's what the agency does, right? And they're bringing you in for this tactical thing. And if you start playing like, hey, we do all these other things, they're going to be like, yes, but we do those things and we sell them and we capture that and we need you to stay in this box.
Right. And so if you even hint to them that you want to sell this stuff, it's almost like a disincentive
100%.
for them to be like, no, we actually don't even try to talk about that type of stuff.
If I had you in and you started to, I very, very frankly, right? Like if you started talking about like swimming in my swim lanes, right? I'd be like, I don't want them around my client.
Right.
Because they're going to be talking about these things and trying to disintermediate us from the relationship. Yeah. And so your job is figuring out how to find environments where you are not an intermediary, right? Which is like direct to client, right? And figuring out how to get people out of the way of the end buyer.
I want to talk about AI. Yeah. It's been on my mind a lot recently, particularly as it relates to creative, but also strategy. Curious if you've been dabbling at all, if you've been following the news about, agent AIs that are actually doing more than just responding to prompts. How do you see this affecting, any level of marketing, branding, creative work, agency services, B2B services?
There's the old saying that you can have it cheap, fast, or good, pick two. Yeah. And I think the reason that AI is so interesting now is that it scratches this human fascination for something that is all three. And I'll hear your argument on the good part. It's like not great right now, but it's good. It's good. It's like objectively good, right? A Mid-Journey photo, even like a Dali, art oil painting is like incredible, right? And ChatGPT is, like good, right? But I think we've all sort of been taken aback by the technology on that basis, because we've been led to believe that having all three is impossible, and suddenly having all three is possible. That's my sort of like broad POV on AI, which probably isn't very interesting because everybody opines about AI right now, don't they? I think the thing to do is to there are a lot of people working on like, how do I become an AI expert? How do I sell a service that is like us using AI or whatever? And I'm like, totally disinterested in having AI be part of the conversation. It's like you walking into an agency and like talking about the cameras that you have instead of the people or the past work or the strategy or whatever. It's like so fundamental, and like, back when we were broke college students, it actually like did matter a lot that like somebody had the 5D, and the prime lens and the whatever, and you just like looked in the bag and you're like, wow, that's like $20,000 of equipment sitting there, and then like that was a big deal. But that's like bush league, right?
Right.
Like everyone's got it. Everyone should be invested in figuring out how to make it work. And I could care less about it being a differentiator, right? Like it's on you and your back end to figure out how to use these things and make them better and make them faster and figure out how to infuse your work and do the thing. But it's like, it's such a cheap selling point, right? Because like everyone is expected to use it now. Everyone is expected to produce the thing. And for what it's worth, like the worst place to be in a sale is to be talking about your costs. And one of your costs is your time spent doing a thing. And that's the value prop of AI, right? Is like, oh, and I can do it faster. And it's like, if you start getting into this place where you're like, yeah, and we're more efficient because we use this AI thing, then it drags the conversation in the direction of efficiency and not output, and not objective, and not performance, and then you start, and then they start picking apart your costs, and I mean, this happens more at the enterprise level, where like procurement comes and like beats you up on it, and like you just don't want to be in that position. You want to be in the position of talking about the product and the output, and if you put a fair price on it, that's on you, man, to like negotiate whether you're going to use AI to save time on this thing, or whether the trade-off is worth it or not, or like whatever. But it's like talking about cameras.
I love hearing that perspective. It certainly gives me a lot of confidence in, the sort of short-term forecast for it. I will say, though, that, as you know, it's been a while since we filmed with Sammy, our last podcast episode. And the reason we stopped is because we looked at the hours it took for our team to edit those videos and make the thumbnails and make the cut downs and churn all that out. Ended up, roughly being somewhere in like the 10,000 neighborhood of what that cost. This episode, we're going to use an AI plugin that's going to listen to the sound of our voice, cut between 3 cameras, cut out all the dead space, and take something that took a day for Nick, who you just met, to being a 30-second click. And then once that full length video gets finished, it'll then be uploaded to another AI that's going to spit out 50 cut downs that has captions that would have taken Nick another week to do. So it's like an order of magnitude of efficiency. That is why we're sitting in this chair now. And the only reason I'm, so excited about it is because this is like, for the end user, the difference between starting a podcast and not. So
that's real. I'm facing that.
There you go. I mean, I just see it as a further democratization of media production, and particularly for, we work with a lot of nonprofits that are smaller and maybe they would do it. And I think you're right in that the reason they're not doing things that they should is because they don't have good visibility on what the right strategies are. But a giant barrier still seems to be that they just get too intimidated by the upkeep of the cost. When you tell them like, well, if you want to do your media well, you have to be like consistent about it and know you're going to suck for a while. And then like eventually you'll get better, but it's going to cost a lot of time and effort. But now that time horizon and the volume has just, I think it's kind of felt like a paradigm shift for me anyways.
Love that. Yeah. And so you get to figure out how you're going to take that to market. Right?
Yeah, like, that's what I'm trying to figure out right now.
If this is good, right? Like, and it will get better. You will get better at using it. Then the question becomes, do I keep my same price and the same output, which might be possible for some clients right now. Eventually the market's going to catch up. And this is going to become the standard. And so, one of two things happens. One, you decrease price to account for decreased costs of producing the thing. Or you keep price consistent and figure out what else you're going to add to the thing. And, this is just like consideration that you're going to have to make based on the market very quickly coming and eating this up. But it's like, yeah, I love the democratization of it, and I think that when we started talking about why it's been so long, that for me makes it like I'm just like hearing your problem and about to stick a knife in it. It's like it's like why do you do this in the first place, right? Like why do you do this podcast, right? Is it because you're attempting to build an audience? Once every couple months having someone is not going to really do that, right? Is it to like have content because you need social content and need to be producing a bunch of things for there, like maybe, but it's like the best use case that I've seen for this type of work might be what we're doing here right now, which is creating content with your target customer, which puts them in the seat of authority, right? And helps develop the relationship and helps keep you top of mind and helps get me into this like amazing studio that we could rent out for productions and things like this. It's like that's the thing, right? And if you like zero in on what the objective is, then it totally just like shuffles the deck on like why we're doing it, who we're going to have on it, like what the metrics of success are going to be, like does Jonathan call me with a production request in the next like 6 months, and you just start figuring out all these things from the place of like why are we doing this, and it's like it takes a lot of work, and you frame it in terms of work, not output, when you don't have a solid like strategy for why we're doing the thing.
I mean, you nailed it. Like that's exactly why we're doing this thing.
Yeah.
Because of all the points you mentioned in terms of us definitely not having the bandwidth to be consistent and be able to keep up the overhead costs of doing it at the pace that media requires. But it is definitely like a demonstration of competence for us to be able to provide this as a service to others. And then to your point about it being the right person you're talking to, that's the exact same pitch that I have to any of these nonprofits or brands that should start a podcast. It is not about them becoming top 10. It is about them creating an experience for their audience. Because if you think about it, they should invite on the people in their community. They should invite on the people who eventually might donate to their cause. So that's exactly right. And I think the other thing that gets me excited about doing media like this, doing content like this, is for anyone with like a cause-based mission, it is a way for them to further their cause directly if the content is aligned with whoever people they're trying to help, right? So if they're trying to provide information or education or any sort of assistance through digital products to their audience, then this is like the cheapest, fastest way to make it. And they can do it with all of these tools I just talked about at a much broader scale than what was prior possible with just, someone manually editing everything.
Yeah, I love this format. I mean, this is the most amazing thing. You sit down for an hour and then you have this gift that keeps on giving of content and cut downs. And, we started out slow and then we got into a groove and like the stuff got better. And, if you like pair this up against like banner ads, right? This is so much better, right? And it's like people view podcasts as like you said it perfectly, right? Like top 10. And I work with a podcast production company who tried to sell me on this idea of like hey, we have this like upsell opportunity. We'll guarantee that you're top 10. I'm like, I don't care. I don't even care about making a podcast. I don't even care about publishing the full length. Like that's not what I'm doing here. Like the job is to get the job is to get like this awesome, rich stuff that like can be cut down into consumable bits and serve directly to our target audience. And like that's the whole value prop here. But it's like you get all the things, and there's another AI too where you can stick this transcript in and get a blog post. And like it's so rich. And I love your point about like this being perfectly applicable for cause-based organizations, because it's like when you're resource constrained, the last thing that you want to be doing is like giving somebody the task of like building out your Google grant so that you can, bid $1, CPCs on like crap web traffic, right? The last thing that you want to be doing is hiring a social media manager to like produce, National Giving Day content. I mean, just like this stuff is just staid and like not interesting or useful and doesn't advance the mission. But like you said, man, you get like, a high net worth individual who's, contributed a lot in the community on the issue that you care about, and you put them in a position of power and authority in front of you and like host that conversation with them. I mean, just the relationship that you develop from them, talking about the thing that they care about, making them feel special.
And then they see it in the newsletter and they share it with their company.
Yeah.
And they look cool because they're now in this thought leadership position. So certainly applies to the sort of executive version of what I was saying in terms of like raising people's profile and giving them this kind of platform to espouse their ideas and work things out in real time, which I think is kind of a fun thing about podcasts. I did want to, give you some of those snippets that I think are really good. For as you said, the point of this being like not about the full episode, but really about these like targeted quotes. And I think I really admire your like LinkedIn haikus. There's so many good ones. And so I have a like one or two that I thought would be great for you to maybe just make some version of for this. And it goes back to the outcomes one, because you had a post where it was like, let's not talk about, number of views. Let's talk about the outcome of it. So can you just talk more about that difference between like giving the metrics? So, and maybe you can set it up so there's a little bit of context at the beginning of like, so when you're going into a pitch and, prior agencies had given them a bunch of data and they were upset or whatever, like what are you coming in to offer that's different from the reporting that they're used to?
A lot of clients ask for dashboards. And I'm like, this is the worst way to start a relationship, is saying, hey, we're going to tell you the performance, but also if you don't trust us, 24 hours, 7 days a week, you can go in on your own and validate that what we're saying is true. It just like starts from a trust deficit. So many agencies are delivering like metrics of things, and that's free to collect from all the ad platforms, many of the social platforms, which is like fine, and it's what people are used to getting. And the problem is once you sold in a project where like that's the only outcome, you're stuck reporting on it. I mean that's literally all that you can give them back, right? Like you sell them a YouTube campaign and you shot the video and like here's how many views got on it, right? And you're stuck because at the beginning of the project you didn't have the conversation, what is this for and why are we doing this, and are you resourced to be able to achieve that objective? And I think that's a huge, oh man, that's just like another rabbit hole. But just like briefly, right, it's like you always want to match the size of your budget match the size of your budget to the size of the thing that you're looking to do, right? Budget to outcome. Oftentimes you have people being like, we want broad awareness in our community and our budget is $40,000. And like, if your community is like, like city blocks, then like that's fine. But if your community is like the greater Washington area, right, like $40,000 doesn't make a dent in that. And so you want to like narrow down that conversation first, right? It's like, who are we targeting and what do we want them to do? What do we want them to do? And so if you learn that the job is not to create an amazing video, but instead that this thing ultimately should be scored on donations. And the question is, okay, what else needs to happen in order for those donations to come in? How are we going to be able to prove ROI? And if you start having that conversation, right? If you start like just like bringing them to the they thought that they had a creative need, what they have is a fundraising need. And if you frame it around that, then at the beginning you set the thing up for success, and you're not pigeonholing yourself yourself into reporting these metrics that you don't want to be reporting anyway. And what it does is also allow you to sell higher margin services on the back end too. Like, oh, you don't have the ability to tag when, people click on the thing and then go to the donate page and whether they donate or whether they donate in 7 days or 30. Oh, great. We can do that too, right? Like that's a service that we offer. You subcontract that, you whatever, but like I push away a lot of money that is not set up to succeed, right? We have $40,000 and want to reach people in DC. Is not set up to succeed, and so I'm going to. And this is the seat that I have, being in a large company where like this isn't going to mean the difference between whether whether we keep staff or not. But I think is a much more powerful and much more effective way to approach the sale is to say, are we set up to succeed? And if not, then let's talk about how we get set up to succeed. And if they sort of get uncomfortable around the idea of success, then it's like, do we want to be doing this? And like, how many times have you made something that like you knew wasn't going to satisfy the need and it didn't satisfy the need and then they're dissatisfied with it? I hate that. You hate that. Everyone hates that, right? Yeah. And like you see it from the beginning. Like you know that this thing isn't going to work. And we do it anyway because we take the paycheck and we're scared of like asking too many questions and scaring them off.
Yeah, that is certainly the case. And goes to your earlier point of like, this would all be so much better if you just let us do our thing in our own bubble and deliver the outcomes without the, constant checking and, unsolicited advice about how to do the job.
Yeah. Yeah. That part's like, the micromanaging client challenge is worth talking about here too. Like expectation setting and onboarding is huge, right? And I'm sure you've sort of like gone through the pain points and like figured out an onboarding process for new projects that helps that. But like the thing that everyone wants to do, of course, in your art is like weigh in on it, and the job is to, I think, figure out where they're going to weigh in on it. To like tell them how to weigh in on it. To say these are the points that you're going to weigh in on it, right? And that just like sets expectations such that they can like breathe, like sit back, relax, exhale, and be like, okay, now I know my part in this, and you assess everybody sort of in the back of your mind when you're pitching them. You're like, how involved do they want to be, right? Like, and I would say that like keeping their attention is a great thing. And sometimes it manifests as micromanaging, and that sucks. And the job is to figure out how to mitigate that and how to structure their input. But I love someone who wants to be hands-on with the work. I love someone who wants to co-create the work. I love someone who wants to get brought in under the tent and the black over their head as they're looking at the thing and the live shot and beyond set and whatever. And so long as you've like properly managed their expectations, like that's the client that keeps coming back, right? Like if you meet their need to get involved in the thing because they have they haven't done any art for a long time and it's like an itch that they want to scratch, right? Like that's a problem that you can monetize. Like they'll pay more for that process. Like they want like that's client success. Is like if they're micromanaging, right? Like somewhere in there isn't it's not like they're being evil or they want to negatively impact the product, right? It's like figuring out like where is that coming from and how do this is cruel, but like and how do we put a price tag on the fact that they're going to be doing that, right? Like there's this pain in the ass tax that agencies apply often in situations like that, and like that's good for everyone, right? It may not be good for some people, but like
I've heard this phrase, and like if you're like a carpenter and you or a plumber or something, you have 3 different prices. It's it's $100 an hour if I do it. It's $200 an hour if you watch, and it's $300 an hour if you help.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's so cynical, and I think what I get that, and I feel that, and I understand the pain of like getting micromanaged and having 7 rounds of revisions and final version 2. Right, that blows. Like I totally get that, man. But it's like something in them like wants to be part of this process. And I think if we like take this out of business and into art for a second, right? I mean, like there's a respect of they came to us because they want this thing to be done well. And somehow we haven't like managed the expectations such that they believe that we're going to be doing it well. And also somehow we haven't figured out how to structure their input in a way that we've prescribed. And so they're prescribing it, right? And if ever they're prescribing their own input, right? Like that's a check for us to be like, we didn't structure this engagement with this client, right? Like they wanted to get involved in it. We either knew that in advance and didn't take proactive steps to figuring out how they're going to get involved, or we got blindsided by the fact that they want to get involved, and like now we have to figure out how to do it.
So I know that you have a lot of thoughts on refining, improving the business development process and what it actually looks like, internally at your agency or at any agency. Talk about what the kind of current state is and why it's that way, and what would be better about it through all the learnings that you've taken from your career and experience, like going through it day to day.
I love that. All right, let's assume you get an RFP in the door. And you have a back channel with the client, right? Like you know them, you're able to get your questions answered. You have reasonable confidence that you are not one of 5 and therefore have an equal 20% chance of winning this thing, right? And if that's not the case, right? Like if you don't have some sort of inside track, right? You really ought to decline to pitch. So this is not the ideal business development process because this isn't sole source. You've got competitors out there, but such is the nature of some work, particularly the big work, particularly inside big companies where you have to pitch against someone else. That's our scenario. I don't mean to pick on my current agency. This exists here. This exists everywhere. Someone senior brings in this is at large agencies, so forgive me for the sort of environment thing, right? Somebody brings in an opportunity. They send an email to 20 people. 8 of those people show up to the call. 2 of them are senior leaders. They spend the entire time bickering. Nothing gets done, and we have to schedule more meetings. And then it just becomes meeting, right? And the reason this happens is because there's nobody structuring the input of the subject matter experts. Leadership is not a title. Leadership is a function in that environment. And it doesn't matter who is in charge from a company perspective, from an org chart perspective. Suddenly the roles have to be redefined for this opportunity. And you have to put somebody in charge of making the hard decisions and somebody in charge of like making sure this process runs right. And the process running right has to be about structuring subject matter expert input. And so oftentimes brainstorms swirl. And the reason that brainstorms swirl is because there's nowhere to capture it in a meaningful way. And so from the very beginning, you want to have a small group charting out what the strategy for this thing is going to be. You take a really small group of people, like a subset of the people who are going to be involved in this thing. In smaller agencies, that might be 1 person, maybe 2, right? Who sit down and say, this is what our strategy is going to be. Hopefully that's informed by research. Let's just assume that that's already happened. Then how do you engage the broader group? The broader group of a bunch of different subject matter experts. How do you get them involved? You have an outline and you co-create the outline with them. You start with a draft of the thing, right? This is my classic. I break this sometimes, but usually it's like a landscape section, a strategy section, and a tactics section, just those 3. And then I start fleshing the thing out with like what I know, and I bring a draft of that outline to the group. This no longer becomes a brainstorm. This no longer becomes people throwing out ideas of something that they read in the news the other day or some other thing or like whatever. Anything that anyone says has to find a place in this thing for it. And someone says something interesting. It's like, oh, that was really interesting. Where should we put that? And then you start negotiating with it, and you're like, that actually doesn't fit, or that's duplicative of this thing, or like that is a good point, and that should be folded in here. And if you structure their input in that way, right, it creates this like push to consensus. It creates like debate, focused debate around the stuff that like really matters, right, which is how are we going to show up, and it eliminates calls where people just spend time where the extroverts who are senior, right, spend all their time, talking about and throwing things out. And then the whole job is figuring out how to structure it so that like every conversation is useful and someone's in charge of saying like, where does that go?
And then what comes next from that? So you've developed a framework for the pitch coming together.
Yeah.
How does it go into closed deal and in an efficient way that doesn't end up getting recycled 6 times by the folks you mentioned who have their various opinions about what should and shouldn't be in there?
Yeah. The benefit of doing it this way is that no one, in that outline process, says like, oh, we should pull in these 5 slides from this other place, right? It becomes much more bespoke, much more custom, and then what you don't want to have happen is like assign everybody to like go and make their own things, because then it creates like different language, different voice, different style, different format, different whatever, right? Like yes, it's a lot of work for one person, but it's so much better to have one person do the thing, right? Like take all the stuff, put it in the thing, vet it by the SMEs, say, is this right? Is this what you intend to say? If not, edit it, fix it, whatever, but like have a single unifying voice. And then, this is back to our situation where this is a competitive process with a pitch phase, and that's not ideal, right? Like you want to be sole sourcing, you want to not have a bunch of, song and dance, dog and pony show to be able to do these things, but let's assume that we do in this situation. And then it's about figuring out who's going to be on the team, which is about figuring out as few people as possible, making sure that those people are like good at pitching, and if not, because they're SMEs and research or something where just like people aren't naturally good at presentation, then you coach them, and then you get them into the room. And the pitch, you should bring, I'm being really prescriptive here. You should bring 30 minutes of slides to a 1-hour pitch. Never have more than half of the time be taken up by you talking at them, because everybody who you pitch just wants to talk. I mean, imagine, right? Like they've felt a problem so badly that they have fundraised for it internally, secured the budget, written an RFP, sent it out to a bunch of people. I mean, this is a time-consuming process for them, and they've decided to do that because this problem hurts. This problem hurts them. And so they want to talk about it, right? You're talking about the thing that like matters a lot to them in this moment. Like they want to talk, like give them a chance to talk. And the worst way to do it, by the way, is doing like 5 minutes and being like, any questions or thoughts or whatever. Never, ever, ever is it we want this to be a conversation, so feel free to interrupt us or whatever. That is the worst way to do it, because you want to know what the most awkward part of doing that in presentation is going back to your deck and getting back in dog and pony show mode. The altitude shift, the air in the room feels weird in that moment, right? Mm-hmm. Get through your thing, right? And if it's awkward to be speaking so long, then bring less stuff to speak about, and give them ample time to like talk and whatever. And one of 2 things is going to happen. One, they're going to want to talk, right? Like they're going to be like chomping at the bit to like jump in and like have a conversation, which is great. That's exactly what you want.
Yeah.
Or you're going to get done and they're just going to be sort of like, like eyes glazed over, and that's never because the problem isn't big enough or the challenge isn't like really compelling to them. It's because they're just like not in talking mode. And so you need that time. You need half the pitch length at least to just like get them in a place where they're able to like talk.
I couldn't agree more. But I love that tactic of like bring 30 minutes to the 1-hour meeting. And talk about some of your specific strategies for, in this day and age, most pitches I imagine are remote.
Yeah.
So that is like an entirely different environment than, a couple years ago, but is now sort of the preeminent way that people are pitching, I'd say, for this kind of work. It makes sense in a lot of ways.
Totally. I don't want to get on a flight every time just to have a 20% chance of winning it.
Yeah. So you talked about when you arrived here, getting a vibe for the room and how that helps you kind of get comfortable, and that's very important for anyone who's about to deliver a performance of any kind, whether it's business or acting or creative. So talk about how you apply that to the virtual pitch.
Yeah. when you bring 5 people and they have 5 people, it's impossible to develop chemistry effectively in that. It's really hard, right? To like get everybody laughing at the same joke, to get everybody moving along, nodding, etc. I want to be the first person in that room, right? Like 5-10 minutes early, so that in case they have anybody who, grew up in a military home or like, is otherwise just like exceptionally punctual, that I can get them talking. Because like one-on-one, you can do it. And if you have them like talking, saying things, laughing, right? Like when their colleagues get on, then you've got like, like momentum, and you can just keep this going, right? And you like, quickly brief the people who come on, but it's not like, hi, I'm Jonathan and I'm from APCO, and but just like the cold start sucks, right? Like it's like a comedy show, right? You never have the main performer, like, you have someone to warm it up. And so your job is to like warm that by getting the people who come early and just like talking with them about the thing and not having the cold start. And man, if you script this thing to have a cold start, it just like blows, Shoot, what was the question?
How do you?
Oh,
this
yeah.
is tactics for mastering the virtual
Vibe,
pitch.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I'm a big fan of bringing stories with me, just like stuff that, like I planted mint last week, and now I've got sprouts, and I promise you, in a pitch environment, like I can deliver that in like an interesting way. I can be like, like really excited. You want to go sell here? I'll go like bring the pot over. If I've got 5 minutes, I'm totally going outside and grabbing the pot and like showing them the thing. And like, is it like, cheap? I mean, yeah, but it's a lot better than like the weather or like, hey, we're gonna wait for a bunch of our team to like come on, or like, are you waiting for anybody else on your end? I mean, like, I would much prefer to like show them a mint sprout than to say all those dumbass lines that we do in like the Zoom environment.
Of course, I mean, I much prefer a novel story about your mint plants than anything that was just like, oh yeah, the weather today. How about them Red Sox or whatever it is?
Yeah.
So that I think is 2 very important tips. So arrive extra early and have really good small talk when you actually do arrive.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't, I say the mint example because it's so not good.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's so easy. Like everyone's got mint, right? Like everyone's got something around them or something, or the Zoom background or something that happened in their day or last week or like whatever. Just like say a thing, like give them a story, like talk about something other than we're waiting for the rest of our team members to arrive. Like, and there's so much tension in a pitch room, and if you can like pop it, right, like from the very beginning, and just like get like there's nothing more powerful than making the small talk with the person, and then their boss arrives, and instead of their boss arriving to a cold room, their boss is arriving to like you talk, and just like their face gets animated, they get pulled into the thing, like it's like it's just a win, and all it takes is mint.
Love it. The mint effect.
Lovely.
Okay, so I would say 9 times out of 10, when you're selling really high ticket items, really expensive services, these calls usually don't end in like a transaction.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
But they have to end somehow.
Uh-huh.
And I think you said something on LinkedIn that I thought was really impactful. So maybe you can talk about that, but it's like, here's what I'm going to do. So talk about ending a meeting properly. What is that process? What's the like dream outcome for the pitch meeting and the vital work that happens once you're off the line?
Yeah. There's an author, podcaster, et cetera. You can consume his content in a lot of different ways. His name is Blair Enns, E-N-N-S, and his perspective is about how do you maintain the position of the expert in the sale. Because if you lose the position of the expert, then what you become is a commoditized product. And when you're pitching against a bunch of other agencies, that is an enormous risk. And so a lot of people like to end a pitch being like, hey, we're really excited about this opportunity with you. Thank you for inviting us to the thing. You do really great things, and we do really great things too. And just some sort of like little bow effect. I think that diminishes the expert position of the agency. Right, like your job is to go in there and convince them that none of the competitors are even in the same league as you. and when you make a play for the business against the other competitors, and you're trying to just like reinforce that you love them and whatever, like show that, don't say that. Right, like the end of like, and we really want your business, right? It is like, it's so small, it like diminishes you. You don't want that. That's not a great place to be. What you want is to end with two things. One, you want to end with some humanity. I'm a big fan of asking, like, so how did we do?
I like that.
It just like cuts the tension, breaks the fourth wall, right? It's like a really just sort of like novel place that doesn't like change that we're experts, right? I don't think it does that. It's casual, but it doesn't reduce our expert role. It instead just like makes us more human, right? And if we've spent the whole time being like, we're gods, look at all this shit that we can do, right? Like then having that moment of like yes, we just spent all this time like amazingly articulating your problem, you know, and getting it better than you would have, you know, been able to say it and yada yada. But like also like we're human too, and we'd love to, you know,
and we want to get better.
Yeah, that's right.
Whether you hire us or not. Any feedback is helpful.
And so when you ask the question, you know, you demonstrate humanity, but you also like get back from them like actually interesting intel. They'll compare you to other agencies that pitched. They'll mention a weakness in your thing, right? Like they'll but what's best is like they get to talk amongst themselves about the good things about the pitch. There's a sort of pressure, right? Like, how do we do? Like, people want to say nice things. Then you've already primed the discussion that they're going to have behind closed doors, which is awesome, right? Like, they've already said good things about you in front of their colleagues. That seeds the jar for the conversation that they're then going to have when they decide among the agencies. So humanity is one great way to end it. Two is like, yeah, exactly right. The idea of like this is what we're going to do, right? And so usually in these environments, at least in my work, right, like there's not a sort of like definitive next step for, you know, you sort of like pitch and then you wash your hands and then you wait for the client to decide who they're gonna pick. But if ever there's an opportunity to follow up with or to you know, address a weakness, or if they wanted a thing, right, just like the proactiveness of like ending the conversation with like just these 7 words: this is what I'm going to do, and then you tell them exactly what you're going to do, and there's so much power in recap, right? The old idea of telling them what you're going to tell them the thing, and then telling them what you do. Just like any opportunity to recap conversations. People love recaps. It's weird, right? You in any conversation, reading it back to them, being like, this is what I heard. This is what I heard you say. This is the sum of the conversation. These are the things that we're going to do. This is what I promised you. Just like anything that is a summation point, it's catnip. People love to hear it because everyone wants to know that somebody is in charge of the thing, that somebody's doing the thing, that somebody's like taking action on the next thing so that they can not.
I love that. And that feels like a good cue for me to wrap things up and summarize this discussion. We covered your career, how you were inspired to, you know, pursue digital sort of spheres of content creation and advertising, how that turned into, you know, a nugget of skill sets and into a broader set of skill sets and an eagerness to learn about various things, how those built on each other. We talked about the use of AI, we talked about pitching, we talked about the value proposition, we talked about the practice of creating a good workflow for agency pitching, which I think is interesting because it kind of reflects the agency service that you're actually trying to provide, right? Your theory behind that, you're just making like a microcosm of it. And then we talked about how to wrap things up. So that was really a pleasure to talk about all those fun things with you. I don't get to do that. I pitch all the time, every day, and I've never really had a colleague to talk through it with, since it's always like something we do internally, and I feel like the most senior person pitching all the time, so I'm not really like gaining new insights from the folks that I'm working with every day. Of course, I don't want to speak poorly about the people who do make really meaningful contributions to our pitching work, but just to get an outside perspective and see someone else doing it at a very high level has been really awesome. So thank you for being here. Anything else we want to talk about or say?
That's great, man. Thanks for having me.
Cool. All right. Well, we can wrap it up there.